Have you ever said, I'll start tomorrow?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Or, you promise yourself, you absolutely swear that you are not going to waste time today.
And then you proceed to do exactly that.
Exactly that. I mean, picture this. You sit down at your desk, you hide your phone, you block all those distracting websites.
You're totally locked in.
Totally locked in. You're completely ready to tackle that big project. And then, I don't know, maybe 14 minutes later, you are staring at the ceiling.
Completely derailed.
Completely derailed, just wondering how on earth you ended up reading like a Wikipedia article about medieval farming techniques.
It's basically the universal human experience. And, well, it's endlessly frustrating because it feels like a betrayal by your own mind.
It really does. You have this firm intention, you make the commitment to yourself, and then somewhere between that promise and the actual execution, everything just...
Disintegrates.
Yes, it just disintegrates. So we are doing a deep dive today into the actual mechanics behind that failure. We're pulling from some really fantastic source material, a practical framework called Mastering the Art of Self-Control.
Right, which is a very concise, straightforward guide.
It is. And our mission today is to move past that generic advice we always hear and figure out the actual cognitive mechanisms at play. Like, what is self-control at a neurological level? Why does losing it completely derail our internal drive?
And practically speaking, how do we build it back up when our willpower reserves are basically at zero?
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this because honestly, the gap between what I plan to do at 8 a.m. and what I actually do by 2 p.m. is a daily battle.
It's a battle for everyone. The material we're looking at today frames this issue brilliantly, though. It doesn't treat the intention-action gap as, a moral failing or a lack of character.
Which is such a relief.
Right. Instead, it approaches it as a breakdown in a very specific psychological sequence. The text might be short, but the psychology it touches on regarding how we lose control of our focus is incredibly profound.
So before we can fix the all start tomorrow problem, we really need to understand what we are actually trying to control.
We have to define our terms.
Right. Because according to our source framework, self-control isn't just one big, vague concept like trying harder. It actually defines it as a rigid sequence. It says self-control is controlling your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions.
That three-part sequence, thoughts, emotions, actions, is really the foundational architecture of everything we're going to discuss today.
It argues that mastering this specific pipeline is the only way to consistently make better decisions. And when I was looking at that pipeline, I was trying to map it onto how my brain actually works in real time.
What do you mean?
Well, usually we just think of the action part, right? Like, we think self-control is stopping your hand from picking up the phone. But if I apply this three-part definition, it feels more like a predictive text algorithm on a smartphone.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like if my brain types the thought, I'm a little bored, the algorithm immediately tries to autocomplete it with the emotion of, craving stimulation.
Right.
Which then autocompletes into the action of opening Instagram. So is the goal to basically catch the algorithm before it autocompletes?
What's fascinating here is how accurately that predictive text analogy maps onto human neurology. The framework is emphasizing that specific sequence because of the sheer speed at which our brains process those stages.
They happen instantly.
Almost instantly. Thoughts trigger emotions, and emotions drive actions. It's a chronological progression. If you wait until the action's stage-like, if you wait until your hand is physically reaching for the phone, you are relying entirely on the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the logical part of your brain, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're waiting for the logical part of your brain to suddenly slam on the brakes.
And isn't the prefrontal cortex already exhausted by that point?
It is completely overwhelmed. I mean, by the time the emotion of craving is running hot, your limbic system, which is the emotional, impulsive center of your brain, has essentially hijacked the steering wheel.
Wow.
So the source is telling us that true self-control isn't about having this iron grip at the very end of the process. It is about catching the initial thought before the limbic system even wakes up.
So you have to intercept the phrase, I'm bored, before the brain autocompletes the emotional craving.
You're catching the spark before it becomes a biochemical fire.
Catching the spark. That makes perfect sense because trying to fight the urge once you already feel it physically in your body is just agonizing.
It really is.
Okay, so understanding that self-control is managing this thought, emotion, action pipeline, we really have to look at the fallout when that pipeline breaks down. And the text makes a very strong claim here.
Yes, it links distraction directly to motivation.
Right. It states that without self-control, people get distracted easily, which directly causes them to lose focus and lose their motivation.
Distraction is the immediate symptom of a broken pipeline.
But, understanding that pipeline is only half the battle. Because even when I know checking my phone will derail me, I still do it.
Right, the urge is strong.
I actually want to push back on the text's claim here, kind of on behalf of everyone listening. Is getting distracted really that big of a deal?
In what way?
I mean, aren't we just talking about taking a harmless break? If I look away from my screen for 5 minutes to, I don't know, stretch or pet my dog, my motivation isn't completely bankrupt. How is the framework defining distraction that makes it such a fatal blow to our goals?
That raises a really important question about the cognitive cost of context switching.
Context switching.
Yeah, we tend to view distraction as a simple pause button. You pause your work, you look at a text message, you unpause your work.
Right, that's how it feels.
But neurologically, there is no pause button. The text specifically links distraction to a loss of motivation because of a mechanism that psychologists call attention residue.
Wait, attention residue, like something is physically left behind in the brain.
Exactly that. When you shift your focus from a complex task, say writing an email or analyzing a spreadsheet, to a highly stimulating distraction like social media, your brain doesn't just neatly close the first application and open the second.
Like it does on a computer.
Right. A human brain doesn't work like that. A significant portion of your cognitive processing power remains stuck on the previous task, while another part is desperately trying to process the new one.
Oh, wow. So you just have too many mental tabs open.
Too many tabs open.
Yeah.
And that buffering, that mental lag, requires a massive amount of metabolic energy.
Oh, that is a terrible feeling. It's like your brain is just spinning.
Yes. So based on the framework we're analyzing, distraction isn't a neutral state of resting. It is an active drain. Every single time your self-control slips and you allow a distraction to hijack your attention, you are forcing your brain to undergo this exhausting switching cost.
And then you have to switch back.
Exactly. By the time you try to return to your original task, your cognitive fuel tank is completely empty. That feeling of emptiness, that heavy, lethargic reluctance to start working again, that is what the text means by losing motivation.
That fundamentally changes how I view taking a quote-unquote quick break to check the news. It's less like hitting pause on a movie, and it's more like shutting down a massive factory operation.
That's a great analogy.
Right. You shut down the factory, you retool all the machines to build something else for 5 minutes, and then you try to retool them all back to the original product.
The sheer friction is enormous.
The friction of starting the factory back up is so high that eventually you just give up. You just say, well, I'll start tomorrow.
And there is the intention-action gap. You didn't fail because you lack moral fiber or because you're a bad person. You failed because you let a distraction bankrupt your cognitive energy today, and the very thought of restarting the factory is biologically exhausting.
Okay, so let's move from this invisible cognitive drain to where it actually shows up in the physical world. The source material provides some incredibly relatable, practical examples of where this pipeline fails us in our daily lives.
It highlights 3 core battlegrounds.
Yes. Controlling anger, avoiding unnecessary spending, and managing screen time.
Those are very deliberate choices by the authors.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you look at these 3 examples from the text, anger, spending, and screens, they essentially represent the 3 most critical leaks in a person's life.
Leaks.
Yeah, think about it. Controlling anger, if you lack self-control there, you are leaking relationships. Avoiding unnecessary spending. If you lack self-control there, you are leaking money. Managing screen time. You lack self-control there, you are leaking time.
Relationships, money, time.
It basically covers the entire human experience.
That is a highly effective way to visualize the damage. Leaks in the system. But to push deeper into the psychology behind why the source grouped these 3 specific things together, we really have to look at what they share underneath the surface.
Because they seem pretty different at first glance.
They do. Anger, impulse shopping, and mindless scrolling might look like 3 totally different behavioral problems, but neurologically, they're the exact same mechanism.
They are. Wait, how is yelling at someone the exact same thing as buying a pair of shoes online?
They are all rapid-fire attempts at emotional regulation. Remember that pipeline we talked about, thought, emotion, action.
Right.
In all 3 cases, the thought introduces discomfort. The thought might be, I was disrespected, or I feel inadequate, or even just I am stressed.
And that thought triggers a highly uncomfortable emotion.
Exactly. And the action, whether that's yelling, buying, or scrolling, is the brain's desperate, impulsive attempt to soothe that discomfort with a spike of dopamine or a release of tension.
Wow. So they aren't different problems at all. They're literally just different masks for the exact same inability to sit with an uncomfortable emotion.
Precisely. And that brings us to that third leak, screen time. The source actually gives us a brilliantly painful everyday example of this.
Oh, the confession.
Yes, it features a confession between two individuals where one asks, who else opens Instagram for 2 minutes and stays there for 2 hours?
And the other person immediately replies, haha, guilty.
Guilty.
The 2-minute trap. I think every single person listening right now, myself completely included, has fallen into that specific black hole.
It's unavoidable in modern life.
You tell yourself, oh, it's just a 2-minute break, but 2 hours later, you emerge from this weird trance and your motivation is entirely wiped out.
The test highlights this because the smartphone is the ultimate stress test for the thought-emotion-action pipeline.
Because it's so accessible.
Exactly. With anger or spending, there is usually some kind of friction. You have to physically be around another person to yell at them, or you have to pull out your credit card to buy something. But the phone is literally always in your hand.
The friction is zero.
Zero friction. If you can learn to control the autocomplete sequence when the distraction is actively buzzing in your pocket, you are mastering the highest, most difficult form of self-control.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high. We know we're leaking time, leaking money, and leaking emotional energy because our brains are constantly trying to self-soothe.
Right.
So the obvious turning point for our deep dive today is, how do we fix the leaks? How does the framework suggest we actually fight back and rebuild this pipeline?
The guide actually provides a specific 4-step architectural blueprint. It advises us to set small goals, avoid distractions, stay consistent, and follow a routine.
Okay, I have to jump in here with a major challenge.
Sure.
Because when I read those 4 steps, especially the commands to stay consistent and avoid distractions, I immediately saw a massive paradox for the listener.
Where is the contradiction?
Well, if someone is coming to this material specifically because they lack self-control, like because they are currently stuck in that 2-hour scrolling trap every single night, how are they supposed to just, quote unquote, stay consistent or avoid distractions?
I see what you mean.
Right. Isn't that like walking into a hospital and telling a sick person, hey, have you tried just being healthy? It feels like the solution requires the exact resource, raw willpower that the person has already completely depleted.
That's a really valid critique.
Hmm.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that your critique is exactly why people fail when they only read the surface of self-help advice.
Okay, go on.
You cannot willpower your way out of a willpower deficit. It's biologically impossible. But the framework isn't actually asking you to do that.
It's not.
No. The secret to this 4-step system lies entirely in how the other 2 steps, following a routine and setting small goals, fundamentally alter your environment.
Okay, walk me through that. How does a routine fix a willpower deficit?
We discussed earlier how raw willpower relies on the prefrontal cortex, right? Which gets exhausted by decision fatigue.
Right, the mental buffering.
Yes. Every single time you have to decide not to look at your phone, you drain the battery a little bit more. But routines do not live in the prefrontal cortex.
Where do they live?
Once a behavior becomes a routine, the brain physically shifts the processing of that behavior to the basal ganglia, which is essentially the brain's autopilot system.
The basal ganglia.
And the basal ganglia requires almost zero active cognitive energy to function.
Oh, wow. That is incredible. So a routine is quite literally offloading the cognitive task.
Exactly. When the text says to follow a routine and set small goals, it is giving you the practical tools to bypass the prefrontal cortex entirely.
So you aren't staying consistent through, like, sheer agony and effort.
Not at all. You are modifying your environment so that consistency happens on autopilot.
So if my small goal is to read for 10 minutes before bed, and my routine is to leave my phone charging in the kitchen at 9 p.m.,
then you don't actually need self-control to avoid distractions at 10 p.m.
because the distraction is physically in another room. The routine made the good decision for me hours ago, back when my willpower was still intact.
You successfully intercepted the predictive text algorithm. By physically removing the phone, you ensured that even if the thought, "I'm bored," pops up, it literally cannot autocomplete into the action of scrolling.
The physical environment acts as a circuit breaker for the pipeline.
That is exactly how a person with zero self-control builds discipline. They don't try to be stronger, they just build smarter routines.
That is such a liberating shift in perspective. I mean, it completely takes the moral weight off of our shoulders, which brings us perfectly to the final phase of our deep dive.
Yes, the payoff.
We've laid out the mechanics, right? The routines, the environmental design, the basal ganglia taking over. But doing this work, really rewiring those neural pathways, it still takes time. And the text reveals that the ultimate payoff of this process is surprisingly contrary to what most productivity gurus preach.
Yes. The source material pivots away from that rigid, militant view of discipline that we are so used to seeing online.
It really does. The framework states that improving self-control builds confidence, improves discipline, and leads to long-term success.
Mhm.
But crucially, it explicitly emphasizes that self-control is not about being perfect.
It is about improving little by little every single day.
So what does this all mean? To me, it feels like self-control is less like a pass or fail exam and much more like a slow-yielding investment account.
The investment account is a highly accurate way to model the psychology here.
Right, because you don't need $1 million in the account on day one. If
Mm.
you are relying on raw, brute force willpower, you are essentially trying to deposit $1 million at once and you just go cognitively bankrupt.
Exactly.
But if it's about improving little by little, as the text suggests, that every time you choose to pause before yelling, or you put that item back in your online cart, or you actually manage to stop the scroll at 2 minutes,
No.
well, those aren't massive, life-altering victories.
No, they're not.
They're just tiny $5 deposits of discipline.
And over time, compound interest takes over. Those small, manageable deposits build the psychological wealth of confidence and success that the text promises.
It's so much more sustainable.
It is. But what is truly vital about this little by little philosophy is how it protects the brain against the single greatest threat to motivation,
Which is?
perfectionism.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. We always hear perfectionism is bad, but mechanically, how does releasing the need to be perfect actually save our motivation?
Because perfectionism triggers a very specific psychological trap known as the abstinence violation effect. Or, in more conversational terms, the what the hell effect.
The what the hell effect. Oh man, I feel like I know exactly what that means just from the name.
You probably do. Most of us do. If your goal is absolute, flawless self-control like 0 minutes of screen time, 0 unnecessary purchases, a perfectly clean diet, you have set a binary condition.
You are either perfect or you are a total failure.
Exactly. And the moment you inevitably slip up and check your phone for just 5 minutes, your brain registers a catastrophic failure. The binary is broken.
And because the streak is broken, your brain just says, what the hell, the day is already ruined, I might as well scroll for 2 hours.
Precisely. That is the engine shutting down entirely. You binge the bad behavior because the psychological pain of failing your perfect standard drains whatever motivation you had left.
Wow.
But if your goal, as the source text states, is simply improving little by little every day,
Yeah.
you completely eliminate the binary.
So a slip-up isn't a failure anymore. It's just like a neutral data point.
It doesn't break the system. You acknowledge that the pipeline leaked. You investigate what triggered the thought or the emotion, and you just try to design a slightly better routine for the very next decision.
The goal isn't a flawless Tuesday. It's a Tuesday that is maybe 3% better than Monday.
By removing the catastrophic weight of perfectionism, you prevent the massive cognitive crash that leads to the "I'll start tomorrow" excuse.
This has been such a transformative look at what, honestly, initially appeared to be a very simple set of instructions.
There's a lot beneath the surface.
So much. We started by redefining self-control entirely. It's not about stopping your hand. It's about managing that microsecond predictive text algorithm in your brain, the thought, the emotion, the action.
We saw the true cost of context switching, too. How even a 2-minute distraction leaves a tension residue that violently drains our internal motivation.
We examined the primary battlegrounds, the leaking time, the leaking money, and the leaking relationships, and recognized that anger, spending, and scrolling are all just different symptoms of a brain desperate for emotional regulation.
And perhaps most importantly, we learned that the way out of the trap isn't brute force willpower.
No, it is utilizing small, manageable routines to offload the cognitive tax to the brain's autopilot. It's about modifying your environment so you don't have to constantly fight your own impulses.
And above all, it's about entirely abandoning the toxic need for perfection in favor of daily, compounding progress, little by little.
The framework we analyzed actually leaves its audience with an interactive practice segment. And it translates into a highly provocative thought for you, the listener, to really mull over as you go about your day.
Yes, The text asks two incredibly direct questions. Where do you need more self-control? And what distracts you the most?
That is the ultimate challenge right there.
It is. We encourage you to look at your own daily routines with this new architectural lens. Identify your personal 2-hour trap. Where is your cognitive energy, your money, or your emotional bandwidth leaking right now?
Because you cannot intercept a thought if you don't know what the thought is.
Finding that specific leak in your pipeline is step one.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to highlight a surprisingly resonant final note from our source material. The text we used was actually framed within the context of language learning.
That's right.
The speakers at the end tell their audience to keep learning and keep speaking, and they note that you don't need perfect English, you just need confidence. But honestly, taking a step back, that ethos applies flawlessly to the messy human process of building self-discipline.
It is a universally applicable truth. The mechanics are exactly the same whether you are learning vocabulary or learning to control your attention.
You really don't need to be perfect at this. You don't need flawless discipline, an unbreakable routine, or a perfectly optimized morning schedule. You just need the confidence to try improving your pipeline, little by little, one tiny routine at a time, every single day.
Just remember the sequence, catch the thought before it sparks, manage the emotion before it flares, control the action through smarter routines.
Tomorrow's success doesn't start tomorrow. It starts with how you manage the very next distraction today.